please.
Thank you. I'm sorry to stand between you and actually the nice walk outside. The weather will still be fine, I hope, when I'm finished. I have a natural tendency to speak fast, so if I do that, please interrupt me and then...
I'll give you a bump for that.
Every time I do that, yeah, I'm going to give you. Okay. So, the recreation of private property in post-socialism involved, among other key institutional aspects, mechanisms for the transfer of rights over specific objects of property, modalities of fair valuation of property claims, and inherently related to the first two, ways to monetize specific forms of property. The capital market, referring both to the stock exchange and to the other organizational forms involved in securities trading and investment, you're going to hear about some in my presentation, was seen, so the capital market was seen by all in Romania and above, not only as a perfect solution to all the issues involving valuation and monetization of property, but also as a driver of economic growth. I draw on situated accounts of interactions with the institutions of the capital market, quasi-theoretical representations of what a market is supposed to be, providing valuable counter-narratives to textbook definitions of stock exchange, articulating both the hopes and disappointments of the capital market enthusiasts in post-socialist Romania. My presentation is part of a longer paper. I skip here over several sections, including one in which I describe the building of the Romanian capital market in the mid-1990s by the United States Agency for International Development. The Romanian project was part of an experiment in international development performed by the USAID in 5 countries around the world. They were India, Kenya, Morocco, the Philippines, and Romania, and they described it as an experiment. It was the biggest, both in terms of the sums invested, over $25 million, and in terms of the specific measures undertaken with the aim of building the largest capital market in the Balkans. So it was a reform in all meanings of the term, not only regulations, not only institutions, all of them. Beyond the functioning exchange, the over-the-counter market in this case, RASDAQ, which was a copy of the electronic trading system, which was a copy of the American market NASDAQ. I'm sure you are familiar with that. The American agency furnished the market with regulations, with a supervisory agency, the Romanian National Securities Commission, with investment funds, and with independent registries to keep track of shares and shareholders. Providing everything from know-how to institutional design and technical solutions, the Romanian project illustrated the turnkey approach to market building, and that was a quotation. That means that they provided everything, and then the local actors just had to turn in the key, and the market would function miraculously. While many of the local actors oscillate between calling the Romanian market a failure and in the disappointment, or at best insignificant for the overall economy, USAID experts emphasize the technical success of the project and call for more in-depth qualitative assessments on the substantive aspects of the market. I also skip a section in which I analyze retrospectively the views of Romanian academics and government executives. Actually, most of the financial responsibles in the government in Romania were recruited from the academia, like any specialist on Western-type financial markets. The two categories merge in many ways or overlap. Regarding the creation and functioning of the market throughout the 1990s, such views of academics and government responsibles generally obscure the multifaceted involvement of foreign governments and international financial institutions during Romania's economic transition. They present the capital market, the domestic capital market, as springing naturally from the legislative germs planted by the national government during the first years of post-socialism, but not being able to realize its potential due to the underdevelopment of the Romanian economy. And the language of germs and planting and legislation is actually comes from their writings. Overall, the indigenous accounts present the capital market as an emerging local set of practices rather than a deficient institutional transfer, as I claim it was. Now I move to a section that I'm going to present more at length, in which I describe the choice of the word experiment and trace some of it. So the logic of experimentation seems to have shaped many of the reforms mandated by the international financial institutions in Central and Eastern Europe. Used increasingly as a research strategy or as an overarching metaphor in diverse social sciences during the later decades of the 20th century, experimentation migrated subtly towards fields such as international policymaking and the global expansion of Western economic models. Experiments became prevalent in the fields of international economic policies, where they served both as strategies of knowledge production about areas of the world that were exiting authoritarian political regimes and closed or command economies, and as a preferred form of neoliberal intervention. That extended naturally again to Central and Eastern Europe with the exit from socialism, where the concept of experiment can be purposefully used to describe a range of processes, from the transfer of knowledge and policy recipes to the treatment of the regional reforms as a unique macro-historical experiment. And actually there is Adriana Petrina, who's an anthropologist of Ukrainian origin, and then she's currently teaching at Princeton, who wrote two great books about experiments. The first one was on trial drug tests conducted in Eastern Europe by Western pharmaceutical companies, and the second one was on notions of experiment with which the medical profession operated after the disaster in Chernobyl, and especially during the post-socialist period, dealing with the consequences and genetical abnormalities of the process. So many people. And then the historical experiments, also not only medical experiments, but kind of social experiments. And the rich and diverse meanings taken by the notion of experiment, as well as its centrality for many reforms of academic and political knowledge, characterize a period of rapid social, political, and infrastructural changes at the end of the 20th century. Gaining identity in the 17th century as an objective method of knowledge production in the natural sciences, experiments migrated towards the social sciences later on. Notions such as experiments and experimentation became widespread during the neoliberal or postmodern, if you want, period, even in the soft or interpretive social sciences, and I refer here specifically to anthropology, where the 1980s was a period of experimentation, experimental writing, experimental research, collaborations, and so on. The acute sense of change manifest in society, politics, and academia after the 1960s, combined with the lack of a clear direction, something for which modernist projects were increasingly criticized at the time, so postmodernism came with a criticism of modernism, turned experiment into an encompassing metaphor and persistent strategy for knowledge production. The contingent shapes and results of the processes of change dominating all areas of society around the globe were to be determined through trial and error rather than programmatic strategies, through the sometimes accidental recombination of existing forms of knowledge rather than the invention of something radically new. And I here use the concept developed by David Stark when he describes institutional recombinations and also new strategies for knowledge production on financial markets. Experimentation became, in many fields, a legitimizing device in a period when the modernist scientist and her grand societal projects were replaced by bricoleurs of knowledge and self-reflective agents of science. The reflexivity engendered by the postmodern critiques of scientific projects migrated steadily towards the field of public policies. As various anthropologists of public policy, and notably Janine Waddell, have shown, the implementation of neoliberal projects around the world is characterized by selectivity, and this selectivity refers to both the facets of external interventions to be promoted. For instance, the emphasis of the scientific neutral dimensions of neoliberal economic knowledge at the expense of the underlying ideological dimensions of such interventions, but also to the silencing of competing forms of knowledge to neoclassical economics and monetarism, so forms of knowledge alternative to these. And then such forms of knowledge could be coming from local actors affected by the projects, from the social sciences characterized by a holistic approach, or even from the growing number of heterodox economists. As Waddell argued, the reform and development strategies imposed by Western donors to Central and Eastern European countries were based on forms of knowledge that were not neutral ideologically, in spite of the silencing of these dimensions by Western consultants. Quoting anthropologist Mark Hobart, Waddell shows that, and I quote, as she quotes, Hobart, that whatever its merits, scientific knowledge applied to development is not neutral, as it is often claimed, nor are the implications of its use, end quote. Similarly, I argue, USAID consultants try to make covert the ideological premises of neoliberal intervention in Romania by packaging the capital market as an international economic experiment. Foreign consultants have contributed to Romanian economic transition with ideas, projects, and advice about the institutional design of the capital market, as well as with technologies and financial resources, but have often managed to produce anachronistic institutions and dysfunctional arrangements that displaced the informal markets emerging at the beginning of the 1990s. In line with Janine Waddell's writing about the Visegrad countries, Romanian institutional reforms overseen by the USAID should be seen as part of a unique historical experiment undergone by the former socialist countries in Central and Eastern Europe, a second great transformation, if you want, from socialism to capitalism, one of whose premises was the building of Western-type capital markets in here. The East European experiment in market building was not unique, but should be seen as one of the test grounds for the profound transformations undergone by Western capitalism during the last 4 decades, a period associated with consumption-driven late capitalism. This is what David Harvey says, experiment-based neoliberalism, and the development strategies under the Washington Consensus. And the Washington Consensus is either described as a specific set of policies, but also stands for neoliberal interventions and financialization of everyday life more generally. Cases like those I have documented in Romania, those presented in other Central and Eastern European countries by Janine Waddell, or those reported in Chile and China by David Harvey in his brief history of neoliberalism, reveal that economic experiments performed in peripheral contexts are essential for the policies subsequently implemented in countries that used to be the core of the capitalist system. Such experiments, for instance, the monetarist reforms applied in Latin America, the inflation targeting regimes implemented by central banks in New Zealand or Canada, or the free trade enclaves set up by the Chinese government, are pursued programmatically and provide learning opportunities for decision makers in the developed states in the West. It can thus be said that the examples from Central and Eastern Europe are part of the reorganization of power and political practice with the growth of neoliberalism. Experimented initially in the less developed parts of the world, such as the countries of Latin America and the former socialist states in Central and Eastern Europe, these tactics of power are now reconfiguring the workings of governments in many mature democracies in the West. Now, I shift the perspective and look at the perspective of somebody who was contemporary of the creation of the market and then an actor in many ways on the market, and then his reflection on that experiment in market building. So one of the most vocal critics of the USAID involvement with Romanian transition is M. I'm not going to give the name, I'm just going to name him as M. He had been both a witness and an actor of the Romanian capital market created in the 1990s, the year when he also launched the first financial newspaper in post-socialist Romania. M is proud to have known personally all the main actors of the Romanian financial system, but also to have managed to keep his financial newspaper apart from any political affiliation. M remembers that during the early 1990s, the only securities that could be effectively traded were the certificates of property distributed initially. So the first privatization process consisted of distributing certificates of property that were later subscribed and transformed into shares for companies. The paper issued shares of 5 companies, part of the trial public subscription process, and the subscription rights or warrants sold by the newly constituted Syriac Bank. M excludes on purpose the few large companies subsequently traded on the Bucharest Stock Exchange, as the exchange was opened rather late, so later than the period he describes, was too sophisticated for the small investors and too selective for the average Romanian company. On the other hand, the 3 types of securities enumerated above occasioned the street corner market, as he calls it, a quasi-informal market operated mostly by Roma brokers or gypsy brokers, buying and selling certificates all over Romania. They were using their talent for business, he says talent, which in his opinion is more sort of a social skill rather than a cognitive ability, facilitating the emergence of an incipient capital market. And I quote his description of such brokers. They were people of great talent who, during the revolution of 1989, after the heroes, and this is a word he emphasizes with sarcasm, have died, came to Piața Universității, the place, to the University Square, the place where everything started, and made a lot of money by selling candles. People had been shot there. These are people that seize any opportunity. They want to make profit, and they want it with greed and primitiveness. As I tried, and I end quote, as I tried to argue both about his presentation of what I saw as negative moral traits, as well as about his stereotyping of the Roma, he protested, and I quote again, "You could blame them from a Bolshevik, from a communist perspective, and treat them as speculators, speculants, which in Romania has both negative moral connotations and then, of course, also negative legal connotations, because during communism you could be put in jail for speculation, for dealing in foreign currency, for instance, and I'm sure maybe the situation was the same here. But these are the qualities that the market rewards," end quote. Certificates of property were circulating and transacted all over the country, being aggregated by persons with high political connections who were later able to bend the rules of privatization and accumulate significant, even if not always legal, stakes in the former state companies. Announcements about available packages of certificates were published in the press of the day, and especially in his newspaper. The newspaper was simply named Bursa, or the stock exchange. Lists of quotations were eagerly read by those looking to buy or trying to sell such certificates. The enthusiasm in the market went hand in hand with enthusiasm for political reforms. Actually, when he describes what was the price of such certificates, you couldn't name any price, and there was no real basis for value. The price of the certificates actually indicated, indexed, if you want, the trust in political reforms, because if somebody made a public statement about privatization and accelerating the program, the value of the certificates on the market increased. Otherwise, it decreased, because otherwise certificates of property were sort of fictions. There were no tied to any particular company. Certificates of property circulating incessantly at the time indexed both the inclination towards transactions and the hopes and expectations of people coming out of socialism, he thinks. Unfortunately, according to M, USAID did not seem to appreciate these qualities and the practices of the informal market. After signing a memorandum with the Romanian Prime Minister Nicolae Văcăroiu in the fall of 1995, and this is something that he describes ironically, because the then Prime Minister who embarked on the effort of privatization has previously worked on the Ministry of Finance, and then was part of the Central Committee for Planning or something like that. And so he was an expert on central planning rather than on capital markets. And the American agency announced their intention to build a complete capital market in Romania, which was meant to become the most significant in the Balkans. USAID consultants visited M's office, and he was happy to inform them of the incipient capital market and to advise them on the ways the market could be consolidated and further developed into something bigger. He only later realized that the Americans, as he called them, did not trust the actors of this informal market and were trying to replace it with a much thoroughly regulated one. Nor did they trust him. M was subsequently visited by the police and the prosecutors and accused of illegal activities associated with the informal transactions in certificates of property. That was not forbidden by the law, but they accused him nevertheless. He managed to evade legal responsibility by invoking laws regarding the freedom of the press, but others were not so fortunate and were convicted for dealing in certificates of property. The imposition of strict regulations of the market had the effect, M thinks, of inhibiting the initial enthusiasm of market actors. The springing of transactions associated with the informal capital market in the early 1990s proved that the culturalist justifications of some international advisors, going along lines such as the Romanians display a mentality gap, that they are unprepared for capitalism and that they should be guided during the transition, were invalid. It was too much guidance from both international actors and the Romanian government that killed the market, the capital market, the incipient one, at the beginning of the 1990s. Now I'm going to present several examples that he gave in the interview, and then other people I interviewed, other analysts of the market, gave to illustrate the dysfunctionalities of the capital market constructed from above, from top down, if you want. And one refers to the list of companies to be privatized, because that was a big issue. So what was even worse, the capital market built by the USAID had serious problems of legality. In spite of the ideology of legalism, the government managed to insert the germs of illegality at the very core of the market. The realization of this fact, happening by chance, but later confirmed by one of the commissioners with the Romanian Securities Commission, the Romanian equivalent of the SEC in the United States, led M to print on the first page of one of his 1997 editions, "The market is quasi-legal." Concretely, many of the shares being traded on Razdak were fictitious recordings of the subscription process rather than actual shares of companies. A list of companies to be traded on the new exchange was compiled under the direct supervision by the Ministry of the Economy at the time in 1996, Mircea Coșa. Although the public was informed of 5,600 companies, a large number given the size of the Romanian economy, that would be made available for subscription and trading once the new privatization vouchers were distributed to the other population, few Romanians were aware of the numerous transformations suffered by the list. And then here I should draw your attention to the fact that those companies weren't just to be privatized, but they were also to be listed on the exchange, which is, generally speaking, a very complicated institutional process. I mean, there are criteria of liquidity, number of shareholders, and things like that. Otherwise, the whole institution doesn't function. From the functionaries compiling the initial version of the list to the minister himself, his secretary retyping the list into the computer, are the low-profile bureaucrats in the Ministry of the Economy and those administering the official bulletin of Romania, where the list was finally published in order to become law, all were able to take off and include companies on the list in response to the political command and the legal influences. And there have been reports in the press about that, and many other people confirmed that story. So it's not an invention. It's not made up. Furthermore, after the subscription process effectuated through the post offices, so people would basically go with their certificates of property at the post office and they say, well, I want to subscribe to that company or to the other one. All over the country has ended. The Institute for Management and Informatics, which was a department within the Ministry of the Economy, centralized the list of subscribers for each company and sent them directly to Razdak. Although each company was supposed to hold a meeting of the shareholders to consolidate ownership, that is, to register all the new shareholders and correct any erroneous data appeared at subscription, most of the companies did not have that chance. So basically, you would go to the post office, and then maybe there was an old lady who would note down your data, and then it would be the wrong name or the wrong identity number, and then you have two persons with slightly different names, but being actually the same person, being shareholders and things like that. So you should have a general meeting of the shareholders in order to consolidate ownership, and then you would trade such shares. Furthermore, although each company was supposed to sign a contract with the market registry, the registry being the institution keeping records of such shares and owners, such as the Romanian Shareholders Registry created by the USAID, for keeping evidence of its shares and shareholders, the majority of the privatized companies did not do that for a variety of reasons, not being informed they will be listed, ignoring the legal provisions, or purposefully undermining the privatization efforts of the central government. So at some point in time, there was a reception paid with tens of thousands of dollars done by the US Embassy, and then they celebrated, well, we have listed the company with number 3,000 on the market. And then he asked, well, how many of these companies actually do have a contract with the market registry? And they say, well, 60 of them. Well, on what basis do you actually list the other companies? And it was a wonder. Now, the second example regarding the trading of fictitious securities. The quasi-legal procedures implemented in the name of legalism by the USAID-advised government have created the conditions for numerous subsequent frauds and are responsible for the lack of legitimacy of the Romanian capital market in the eyes of the investors, as well as for the avoidance of capital market financing by domestic companies. A striking example of illegality at the heart of the market is that of the shares of Petrotrans, a state company that was initially on the list of those to be privatized through public subscription, but was later included, along other 42 state companies, in the mammoth oil company Petrom that was privatized in 2004 and sold to the Austrian state company OMV. As directors of Petrotrans, so the company in question, were not aware their company was listed on Razdak actually and had no contract with the institution, and the stock market managers were not aware that the company did not exist as a legal person anymore. For over 3 months, investors, brokers, and the Romanian Shareholders Registry were manipulating fictitious securities, in fact, subscriptions from the privatization process, and not actual shares of the company. And again, there have been reports in the press about this. And printed another shocking headline on the first page of his January 6, 1997 edition: Razdak is trading in phantom shares. Market authorities subsequently treated the matter in an ambiguous way, blaming the directors of the company for not informing them on the merger. It is still unclear to M how all the transactions effectuated in the meantime have been cancelled, or how investors have been compensated for the fictitious purchases the market has facilitated. As ongoing scandals surfacing in the press indicate, many of the unaware investors have simply not been reimbursed for that. And over 16,000 shares of that company have been traded, although the company didn't exist anymore. What happened, nobody knows. The third example refers to the dead, the elderly, and the unaware investors or shareholders. Another scandal illustrating the hybrid nature of the market, the fusion of legality and illegality, incorporated by the exchange, had burst sometime into 1999. One of the brokers, and here by broker I refer to a securities company, authorized to trade on Nasdaq, was reported to have transacted large numbers of shares of the private ownership fund. And those were investment funds created in the process of privatization. I'm not going to give you too many details about it, but we can discuss about their role in the privatization process. Belonging to unaware shareholders. The investigation revealed that the practice has been going on for months, if not for years. However, the boldness of those involved in the scheme, they had tried to sell over 13 million shares of a very large financial institution, so the private ownership fund itself, made the company and later the market authorities and the Securities Commission wary of the situation. It was a qualified investor, M says. The arrangement has been rather simple. Shrewd investors managed to purchase informal copies of the shares registries. And here, by shares registries, I refer to the list of owners and shares of diverse companies from some of the registries, and here by registries I refer to the institutions that are allowed by law to keep such records, authorized to operate on the market. Such a black market for registries, so for lists of owners and shares, has grown at the very core of the formal market infrastructure, indicating a symbiotic relation of formality and informality. Basic interrogations of the databases of shares and shareholders using the personal identification numbers allowed them to identify the persons likely to be dead, the elderly, and those situated in rural areas that were very unlikely to keep track of their securities account balance. And displacing the informal market, actually in the formal market, you had to have a broker in order to be able to transact shares. So if you live on the top of the mountain, you couldn't go to the next big city where you could find a broker, so you couldn't care less about the shares. Added to the above were the numerous people that have oversubscribed and owned fractions of company shares instead of shares themselves. That's also something difficult to understand, and that is a peculiarity of the Romanian capital market, criticized severely by M. Such very small holdings accumulated through oversubscription or through inheritance, because if your parent had one share and then there were two brothers and each inherited half of it and so on. And further devaluated by the market decline of 1997 and 1998, constituted practically non-transactables of the capital market, as the fees and the transaction costs for any individual holder were higher than the value of principal. They were securities taken out of circulation because of the institutional rules associating them with the wrong persons in unintended ways. The investors manipulating the registries also purchased a securities company that was allowed to operate on the market, but did not notify the Securities Commission of the change in ownership. They used the accounts of previous traders to transact based on fake selling orders, cash in the money, and disappear. As the rules of the market allowed transfer of ownership by the market registries based on orders among securities firms, such as the one that they had purchased, such transactions were enforced and money was transferred to the fraudsters. Furthermore, as the transfer of property of the securities firm was registered by a public notary but not by the market authority itself, previous owners and brokers associated with the firm were no longer liable for this, and then who's to be caught and prosecuted? The incomplete transfer of property created a liminal legal space, a zone of informality in between legal statuses, but at the very heart of the market infrastructure that facilitated the illegal transfer of securities. The illegal market in registries was blooming on the stipule of the market, illustrating a fractal growth, I argue, of legality and illegality, much like the inflorescence of the cauliflower. Much like this inflorescence is made up of the fine alternation of meristem and empty spaces, or like the seashore, if you want, is an endless succession of low cliffs, bays, and ravines, each component getting its shape and identity in opposition to the other, but not essentially being so different, I would argue. Although the intention stated by the USAID experts was to create an equalitarian market, and the universal privatization process meant to facilitate access to the newly privatized companies to all Romanian citizens or adult Romanian citizens, irrespective of their age, location, education, or social status, the practical results were in many ways quite the opposite of the intended principles. Many of those that received certificates and vouchers during the privatization process were unable to convert them into shares. Even if they managed to do them and to convert them, they found it impractical to transact those shares or to transmit them to their inheritors due to the distance from authorized intermediaries, to the lack of information, or to the level of commissions and fees. Furthermore, in spite of the habitual image of the stock exchange as a sphere of financial liquidity premised on the incessant circulation of securities, in Romania, many of the segments of the market were virtually immobile. Not only were institutions like short selling or the use of securities as financial collateral unavailable in Romania, but a significant part of the individual portfolios were simply too small or too remote from the market, given the necessary interactions of shareholders and authorized brokers, to be practically traded. And protested energetically to my interpretation of these fraudulent practices as calls for better regulations and the more determined intervention of the Securities Commission, both key objectives of the USAID program in Romania. And I quote what he says: "It isn't about trusting the market, it's all about trusting yourself. On the contrary, there is a complete distrust of the market. Nobody can assure you of anything. You should be able to take care of your investment as you take care of the money in your wallet. You could be robbed of it. Anybody could trick you on the market. You want to buy something and they run away with your money. You can't trust the market because nobody can help you, neither the police, nor the Securities Commission, nor anybody else," I end quote. He enumerates several situations when the Romanian Securities Commission did not have the authority to enforce existing regulations, or when the sanctions it applied were rather inefficient in correcting the behavior of market actors. M is generally against coercive measures trying to impose the normative logic of the market. He argues strongly for regulatory elements to be induced along the natural growth of the market, as he says. Such naturally growing regulations are those affecting the interests of those transacting on the market, and thus more likely to be obeyed. And I also give an example of what he calls gulgute, and that is an argotic term in Romanian, and I'm not going to translate it here, I'm going to explain it in a minute. So to illustrate his theory of natural regulations, M remembers a moment of crisis for the informal market in which his newspaper was involved. Back then, so at the beginning of the 1990s, before the USAID created actually a market in Romania, so before the USAID involvement, when the street corner market was gaining momentum, the newspaper he was running decided to publish the quotations and transaction prices of the securities in circulation. And again, those were certificates of privatization, shares of the few companies already privatized, or the subscription rights of a newly created bank. As well as, so he published these quotations and prices, as well as announcements about future transactions, similar more or less to real estate prices you could see in a newspaper. The newspaper decided to order the quotations similarly to the auction logic of major stock exchanges, sell announcements in the ascending order of prices and buy announcements in the descending order of prices, so as to match as many transactions as possible. Everything seems to work fine, and the information circulated as a speed as, and I quote again, "a transaction of 5,000 certificates in Iași, a town in Moldova, would be known in less than 30 minutes in Cluj, a town in Transylvania." This happened until gulgute appeared, an argotic term with strong ethnic or Roma connotations, often associated with a language learned in prison and used by criminals during hits. Gulguta refers either to a donut or a dumpling, or figuratively to a lie, a con job, or a more complex scam. In the context of the informal market hosted by M, gulgute referred to the inclusion of fake information in the announcements placed by Bursa, in Bursa, his newspaper. In time, traders, they were not certified traders, would announce the wrong securities being sold. So they would say, well, I'm selling this, but they weren't selling those. And this is something easy to understand for him, because when contacted, the brokers or the traders could argue that the security announced has sold off, but there is another security being traded. So you could understand this lie. They could announce a very attractive price, and then again, you can understand this because when you call, they will say, oh, the market has moved, so the price has gone up. But they could provide the wrong phone number, and that has puzzled him. So you give a fake phone number. And he was puzzled by this, and he decided to investigate it. So he found that the traders were placing very attractive announcements in the name of their competitors. So when the market was accelerating, having one's competitor phone blocked by incoming calls would be a great advantage, right? And this is beginning of the 1990s with the poor telephone company networks, and then you only have a small office, which would be your apartment, and only one phone. And that would be busy. At the moment, he realized he was managing a market that was becoming increasingly sophisticated, and he decided he was responsible for it. Therefore, he published an editorial called "Gulgute are forbidden," okay, this practice, in which he explained that such practices risk undermining the market and that he will no longer host the announcements in those, for those engaging in such a practice. So this was his editorial piece on the front page of the newspaper, and said, I'm not going to do it anymore if you do that. He also decided to implement a more thorough checkout procedure through which announcements placed with Bursa were verified before going to print. He was pleasantly surprised later to find out that his naturally implemented regulation was effective, and that the practice of placing Gulgute has stopped right away. And he gave this example, sort of an example of how you should get involved with the market, how you should regulate the market. The strategy of building a more sophisticated market, one that M could learn to appreciate in spite of earlier criticism, would be to build on the naturally emerging market forms, such as the one he had administered in the 90s, and persuade market actors of the advantage of more abstract mechanisms of settling transactions. Given the declining role of the capital market created by the USAID in Romania, and that is rather insignificant, I mean, it's more or less a fiction, okay? M advises a comeback to the initial forms of securities, that is paper-issued shares. Now they are dematerialized, they are electronic recordings, as a way to return to the foundations of market behavior. Although the dematerialization of stock practices, practice nowadays is justified on developed markets where they facilitate clearing and settlement, so you wouldn't move trucks around with piles of shares in between brokers. In Romania, it is advisable, and again I quote, to let people touch and feel their possessions, end quote. The dematerialization of shares has left Romanians with the impression that their market reinstates a socialist form of ownership. After the socialist experience, Romanians were suspicious of any form of property in which they would not keep possession, or in which they would not be practically able to use. And he tells numerous jokes about the socialist period when the collective, agricultural collective would have a car, and of course it would belong to the whole village, but only the president of the collective would drive it. And he say, whom does the car belong to? To all of us. And who's driving? Of course, the president. So that kind of situation. His solution to the current distrust of the market in Romania is to go back to the transaction of paper shares, securities that function like quasi-money, as they have liquidity, can be kept under the pillow or under the mattress, can be used at any hour, and not only when the market is open. So you can go to a bar, he says, and leave the shares on the counter and says, well, give me something to drink. And you could do that at midnight. You don't have to go to a broker in order to do that. And that can be used at any hour, so even when the market is open, without the intermediation of a broker. This could be, in M's opinion, a way towards rebuilding capital market foundations. Paper shares could be the market fetish, symbolizing the possibilities of financial gains, facilitating the circulation of value, and advertising the companies being traded. And as he says, this is the best kind of poster that you can have. On the face of the share, you have the name of the company, the total capitalization of the company. So what kind of advertisement, what better advertisement do you need? Okay. So to move towards the conclusion, I treated the institutional processes, this institutional process as an international experiment in market building. Although describing it in similar terms, promoters of the market such as the USAID and Romanian authorities generally overlook its ambiguities and failures, characterizing it as either as an example of foreign-induced economic reform, in the case of the USAID, or as a successful institutional project growing indigenously. And this is what the Romanian academics say. Situated accounts of market witnesses draw attention to the several key aspects of reforms. Institutional and technological transfers do not happen naturally, but are joined by a consistent ideological baggage and are mediated by situated practices, experiences, and expectations. At the same time, neoliberal reform recipes that guide experiments like those the USAID has conducted bracket alternative forms of knowledge that, although maybe less scientific than neoclassical economics, are nevertheless better equipped to make sense of the local processes and sensibilities. Last but not the least, the ideological consensus mimicked by local authorities, Western donors, and appointed consultants entertain the illusion of an unproblematic neoliberal transformation of the post-socialist world. Such a bracketing of ongoing disputes over ideas and values constitutes one of the covert forms